the final sprint.
In a typical year, we're often not faced with questions of whether the vote we cast will preserve democracy or put us at risk. But this year we are.
With just days to go before Election Day, President Biden and Democrats make their closing appeal to voters.
Are you better off today than you were 2 years ago? You were not making choices between heating and eating.
And Republicans focus on inflation, arguing Democrats holding on to power will hurt voters' wallets.
I think it's important that we get the right people in so that we can maintain our freedoms that we've worked so hard to get.
I think the country is going in absolutely the wrong direction. Crime is up. Inflation is absolutely horrible.
But with Americans so divided, in which direction is the country heading? Next.
This is Washington Week. Corporate funding is provided by Consumer Cellular. Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewens for the Ewen Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. Once again from Washington, moderator Yamiche Alcindor.
Good evening and welcome to Washington Week. Election Day is just 4 days away, and already more than 35 million Americans have voted early. Republicans appear to have the momentum on their side as they push to have a red wave and take control of the U.S. House and maybe even the U.S. Senate. The latest polling indicates Republicans are benefiting from voter concerns over inflation. This all comes as each party's heavy hitters are making their final pitch to voters in key battleground states.
Inflation is a real problem right now. But the question is, who's actually going to do something about it? Let me tell you, the Republicans talk about it, but when you press them for an answer, things get real quiet.
This is the year we're going to take back the House, we're going to take back the Senate, and in 2024, most importantly, we are going to take back our magnificent White House, right?
Now, Tuesday's election is the first since the January 6th Capitol attack, and many Republican candidates are still denying the outcome of the 2020 election. That, along with the violent attack on Paul Pelosi, of course, is the husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, that all led President Biden on Wednesday to sound the alarm about threats to democracy.
We're facing a defining moment, an inflection point. We must, with one overwhelming, unified voice, speak as a country and say there's no place for voter intimidation or political violence in America, whether it's directed at Democrats or Republicans. No place, period.
Now, Republicans were quick to criticize that speech. Here's House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy.
I listened to the president's speech. I don't remember hearing anything about inflation, about gas, about border, about fentanyl, about crime.
Joining me now to discuss the latest on the midterms and what to expect on Tuesday night and really all of next week, Sahil Kapur, senior national political reporter for NBC News, Dave Wasserman, senior editor for the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter, and joining me here at the table, Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today, and Jeff Zeleny, Chief National Affairs Correspondent at CNN. So thank you all for being here. Now, I want to start with you, Dave, because you are our data man. You are the person that's going to tell us. Maybe you can tell us who won, but I won't ask you that yet. What I will say is that the Cook Political Report, you moved, and I have to get it right, at least 10 House seats, all held by Democrats, in the toss-up category. And I want to put up a graphic for folks, if we can pull it up, please. The graphic shows the House race, and this is apart from the solid seats. You have 29 lead Democrat, 24 lead Republicans, and 35 toss-up seats. So how are things looking on the House side? I'm going to ask you about the Senate later, but I want to ask you about the House side and what you're seeing.
Republicans have the advantage in the House. There are 212 seats that we currently rate as leaning their way. There are 188 seats that we currently rate as leaning towards Democrats, and then those 35 toss-ups. So Republicans only need to win 6 of those 35 toss-ups to win the House, whereas Democrats would need to win 30 of the 35 to keep the House. And Republicans have had some key advantages all along. Not only do they have a slight enthusiasm gap, according to polls, but they've benefited from redistricting, which might give them 4 of the 5 seats they need for the majority off the bat. They've also benefited from a higher number of vulnerable Democratic open seats. There are more Democrats retiring in the House from swing seats, 19 to just 6 for Republicans. And then also, Republicans have had a much stronger recruitment cycle with candidates than they've had in the Senate, led by Kevin McCarthy's efforts to recruit candidates who are women, minorities, veterans. In fact, 70% of the Republicans in the most vulnerable districts are at least one of those things. And that list of vulnerable Democrats includes some pretty big names, people like Katie Porter from California, Abigail Spanberger and Alyssa Slotkin and Elaine Luria, some of Democrats' national security stars, and even the chair of Democrats' campaign committee, Sean Patrick Maloney in New York.
And I mean, that race with Sean Patrick Maloney is one to really watch because, of course, as you said, he's the head of the DCCC. I want to, of course, now put up another graphic by the Cook Political Report. This deals with the Senate side. You have 48 Dem House seats, 48 Dem Senate seats, 50 GOP Senate seats, and then you have 1 to 2 toss-ups. So talk to us about what's going on in the Senate and what the latest is there.
Well, the Senate's really going to come down to 4 races: Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Nevada. And Republicans need to win 2 of those 4 to win the Senate. Democrats would need to win 3 of those 4 to hold the Senate. And right now, they're really, really tight. Republicans might have the slight edge in Nevada, but even New Hampshire is coming into play. Whereas Democrats are clinging to very small leads in the polling averages in Arizona and Pennsylvania. And Georgia really looks like a pure toss-up between Democrat Raphael Warnock and Republican Herschel Walker. And keep in mind, with a libertarian on the ballot in Georgia and both candidates sporting considerable negative ratings, we could be looking at a December 6th runoff, potentially to decide control of the chamber.
And Jeff, I want to come to you because you've been out on the campaign trail. You went to Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Iowa, just to name some, with me able to catch my breath. I know that there are probably more states there. You say one of the things that you're going to be watching for is split ticket voting, and you're watching these places where a Senate and a governor's race might determine the outcome of those races. Talk a bit about split ticket voting and what we're seeing in the gubernatorial races and how they relate to the Senate.
It's really interesting. I mean, these elections don't happen in vacuums, of course, and midterm elections play out state by state. So yes, national forces play a role, no doubt, but I'm fascinated by the governor's races and the Senate races. Now, in Pennsylvania, for example, the Democratic governor candidate, Josh Shapiro, the attorney general, he's in command of this race. It's probably one bright spot for Democrats on the entire map of the country, or the brightest spot. Will he help John Fetterman, or are voters in the mind to deliver a split ticket and vote for Shapiro for governor and Mehmet Oz for Senate? He's the Republican Senate candidate. That is also possible. I've talked to voters who are interested in that. In Georgia, though, for example, Brian Kemp, the Republican governor, is in also a stronger position than some might have thought. Will he help Herschel Walker? Will he help pull him over? It's in Arizona, Nevada, New Hampshire. So these governor's races also are very fascinating. But Dave was just talking about New Hampshire. Really have our eye on that here as we head into this weekend, because the Governor Chris Sununu is in a command of that race as well, it looks like, and the Senate race is suddenly a toss-up. Will he help pull the Republican candidate over the edge for Senator Maggie Hassan, the Democrat there? They're worried about that race. So all these races are sort of interconnected. So on election night, I'll be watching split ticket versus coattails.
For sure. It's all fascinating. Now, this election season, a record amount of money has also been spent on campaign ads. Here's one from Democratic Representative Elaine Luria.
Politics used to be about serving. Today, it's about winning at all costs. If you're looking for someone who'll just say anything just to win, I'm not your candidate.
And here's another from Republican Senator Marco Rubio's re-election campaign.
The radical left will destroy America if we don't stop them. They indoctrinate children and try to turn boys into girls. They allow illegal aliens and drugs to flood America. And if you speak out, they ban you on social media and they call you a racist.
Sahil, I want to come to you. You're out there in Georgia. You've been across the campaign trail as well, just like Jeff and myself and others. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what issues voters are talking to you about and how that connects to these closing arguments we're hearing in some of the ads like the ones we just played.
Right. Well, Yamiche, I think what we just heard in those ads is the difference between someone who's running in a competitive race and needs to win the center, which is Elaine Luria, and someone like Marco Rubio, who is quite safe in his state of Florida, which is increasingly trending toward Republicans, and he is leading the polls by a wide margin. Now, the closing arguments we see across the country, there are very familiar themes here. Many of the Republicans, especially on the Senate level, are running on a very simple message that inflation is bad and it's the fault of President Biden and Democrats. The reality is much less simple. Inflation is a phenomenon around the world. It's a global phenomenon. It's not a uniquely American thing. It's about COVID and supply chains and all these complicated things, but you can't fit that on a bumper sticker. Republicans are betting that they can ride that disenchantment that voters have and present themselves as this kind of change party. The Democratic closing argument is more complicated. They are saying, democracy is at risk. They say abortion is on the ballot. If you want it to be legal, then vote Democrat. They say Republicans don't have a plan to deal with inflation other than to cut Social Security and perhaps Medicare as well. So if you add all that up, you can see that Republicans have the simple bumper sticker slogan, and Democrats have this kind of scattershot series of arguments that they're trying to make. And here in Georgia, you see that dynamic with Herschel Walker, the Senate candidate, putting a lot of money into a closing ad, just trying to, make the case against the Democratic-controlled Washington, whereas Raphael Warnock, the Democratic incumbent, has these series of ads trying to emphasize his bipartisan credentials, trying to talk about how he's worked with Republicans to do things like build highways and, protect farmers in the South. And he is also, featuring testimonials from various, voters, from Democrats to progressives to center-right to Republicans, making the case against Herschel Walker. So it's a more complicated phenomenon for Democrats who are pushing against political gravity than it is for Republicans who have political gravity on their side down the stretch.
And Susan, that gravity, I think, metaphor that Sahil's using is really apt in this moment. Also, bumper sticker versus complex. We saw President Biden try to walk and chew gum this week. He said this speech on democracy being a threat, but he also wants to talk about inflation and reproductive rights. I've heard from at least some Democrats, including the former campaign manager for Bernie Sanders, who said he should have been talking about inflation. This is what that speech should have been about. What are you hearing from Republicans and Democrats?
This has been a complicated race. Complicated because of the attacks on democracy, complicated because of the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade. But as we get in these final weeks, it has gone back to the fundamentals, to the basics, to the things that traditionally determine midterm elections. And that is the president's approval rating and how voters are feeling about the economy. And on both those fronts, that is accounting for this new Republican momentum that has Republicans feeling pretty confident. Republicans believe they're going to take the House. The only question is by how much. We'll see if they're right. And it's hard to predict the Senate, but we do have races like in New Hampshire, like in Colorado and in Washington State that Democrats did not think would be tight and that now look tight as you go into these last few days.
And Jeff, what are you hearing from White House officials and from your sources? You've covered a bunch of White Houses, including at one point the Biden administration, the thinking behind this speech, but also the impact and consequences of having a more complicated closing argument.
Look, it was a bit of deja vu hearing that speech because I was in Philadelphia when he gave the speech in September, which was largely the same thing. But look, one speech is not going to, in this day and age, sort of grab everyone's attention. So I think, A, it was simple for the president to go to Union Station in Washington, which is not far from the White House, because he's limited in places where he can go across the country. But we talk about closing arguments. I think that may be a bit of a passé way to look at things, because there are many arguments sort of happening at the same time. He's on the West Coast talking about the economy, but he really was on Wednesday night talking to Democrats, trying to get the Democratic base sort of, on his same anger level, I guess, and to sound the alarm about democracy, because there are limited things he can talk about. It's hard for him to talk about inflation, but there's no question that the headwinds are blowing. I talked to a Democratic campaign manager in a prominent House race this week, said, I sure wish the election would have been last week.
Yeah. Or September 8th. That would have been a great time for Democrats
to have. So you just get the sense that things are not moving in the right way for Democrats. But I think for the president's point of view, he'll be out on Saturday in Pennsylvania with former President Barack Obama. Former President Trump will be there as well. So there are limited things that any president can do. And my guess is that White House speechwriters are already thinking about the speech the day after. Barack Obama called it a shellacking in 2010. Yeah. George Bush called it a thumping in 2006. we'll see what President Biden calls it.
But you know, one thing about, we focus on the horse race here, and especially a few days before the election, how could we not? But thinking about the president's speech about attacks on democracy, I think there was a lot of criticism that wasn't a smart political speech to make at that moment. It's not the strongest argument. It's not focused on the issues that are driving voters. But it's an issue that's been important to him. Right. From his first decision to run for this office. It is an issue that means a lot to him. So maybe sometimes you make a speech because you just think it's a message you ought to deliver, even if it's not the perfect moment politically to do so.
I got the sense listening to it that he was trying to speak in some ways to history and trying to really sort of put his hand out and say, if this election night turns into election week, election month, if maybe we end up in another place where we're all arguing as a country, I think he was trying to say, let's try to not have political violence and calm it down. But of course, Republicans and some Democrats are saying that's off base. I want to come to you, Dave. You said something kind of surprising to me and to our team, which is a big chunk of voters are still undecided, even at this very moment. You think maybe that's being overlooked. Please explain that, because it's 4 days away. We've heard so many arguments. What's going on?
Yeah, in all these polls of the hottest Senate and House races, there are still 6 or 7% of people who haven't tuned into their congressional vote choice. And believe it or not, there are people who make up their minds the day before or the day of the midterm elections. And their decisions could vary by geography. We're noticing that Democrats' numbers are holding up better relative to 2020 in red and purple states that have seen big fights over abortion, such as Michigan and Kansas and Pennsylvania and perhaps New Hampshire, whereas Democrats are facing double trouble in blue states where they are double incumbents and control both federal and state government. Places like New York and Oregon, California, even Connecticut and Rhode Island have House seats where they're at risk because voters are holding Democrats doubly responsible for everything they're dissatisfied with, not only pocketbook, but crime and homelessness. And abortion rights are not as under threat in those states, so that hasn't been as potent an argument for Democrats. And look, if your top issue is abortion or immigration, I can pretty much guarantee you're going to vote, and I can tell you with a high degree of certainty which party you're going to vote for. But if you're still undecided at this point, you're looking at this choice through a pretty simple lens. Am I feeling safe in my community, and are things too expensive? And Biden's approval rating on handling of the economy in most polls among independent voters has been in the mid to high 20s. And so I still think Republicans have more upside with that cohort of persuadables who remain.
Interesting. Very interesting. And Sahil, I want to come to you because you wrote an interesting story this week. It was about the NAACP calling on radio stations to stop airing an ad by a conservative group, America First Legal. It's accusing the left, quote, and some Democratic leaders of promoting, quote, what they say is racism against white people. What more do we know about this ad, and also what's come from the NAACP calling for these ads to be taken down?
Well, firstly, Yamiche, on the second point, I checked in with my source before this show, and they mentioned that 9 of those radio stations have agreed to take that ad down. So that letter by the NAACP has gotten some results. But what you see there is an ad by a group led by a former Trump advisor who's known to be combative, known to be very pugnacious, trying to escalate this racial rhetoric. I think it's having an impact because race and attitudes towards race are probably the single biggest fault line in American politics right now. And it dates back to 2015 when the candidacy with Donald Trump was in part based on some rather explicit racial appeals, mainly to working class white voters, that they had been forgotten, that they were being looked down upon in ways that we had really seen before as a dog whistle. And this represents an escalation of that. This new ad explicitly accuses the administration of promoting racism against white people. Now, the facts in this ad were checked, and they did not match. They did not match up to reality. There were claims made about the president and the vice president that were false or taken out of context. But regardless, this is something that certain figures on the right see as effective and a way to respond to the fact that Democrats, too, have since about 2015, 2016, been speaking a little bit more directly to disadvantaged and marginalized groups in this country, African Americans, Latinos, and talking about structural racism. Rather than responding to that by incorporating those arguments, Republicans, at least some of them, have decided, if you're going to accuse us of being racist, we'll accuse you of being racist against a different set of people.
Very interesting that they think this is going to be effective, which it might be effective. Sahil, I want to also ask you, you're obviously, when you're not in Georgia chasing candidates, you're in the Capitol building. I've read a lot of stories about the jockeying that's taking place, both on the Republican side with House Speaker, I should say, wanting to be House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, but now, of course, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy making his decisions and Republicans making plans on what they might do in terms of launching investigations. But I've also heard on the Democratic side with someone like Hakeem Jeffries sort of checking out the scenery to see what he might do if House Speaker Nancy Pelosi leaves. What are you hearing?
Well, Yamiche, the very likely next speaker, if Republicans take control of the House, is Kevin McCarthy. He is in line for this job. He has spent the last 2 years basically making every decision on the basis of what's best for Republicans in this 2022 election and what's best for my prospects of becoming Speaker of the House. A Republican House, I would say a few things. It's a Republican House and President Biden, we're going to see a lot more brinkmanship on the basic functions of government. These appropriations bills and government funding bills are going to become more contentious because Republicans I've talked to in the House are going to have demands. They're going to want things on immigration and the border wall. They're going to want spending cuts. And they see issues like government funding and the debt limit as well, which is a much more potent weapon, potentially more dangerous if that leads to brinkmanship as leverage points, for them to get what they want on a policy matter that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to get, through the normal legislative process. We're expecting to see a lot of investigations of the Biden administration as well. That's in the House of Representatives. Now, on the Republican side, on the Democratic side, there's a big question of what the top three leaders, including Speaker Pelosi, do, especially if Democrats lose control of the House. They're all in their 80s. There's been a moment that Democrats have been leading to a generational transition, and everyone has just been asking, when is it going to happen? It's only a matter of time. And if Democrats lose the House, there's an expectation. Some sources that I've talked to are expecting all of those three top Democrats to be pressured into stepping down and a new generation of Democratic leaders to rise to the top. And the man who is most likely to rise to the top, according to the sources I've talked to, is Hakeem Jeffries. He's positioned himself well for that job. He has got support and respect from various sides of the caucus. And in a transition like that, some of the Democrats I spoke to also said that those who are currently lower ranked than him are unlikely to try to shake the tree, unlikely to try to cause even more of a disruption than would already be created from someone like Speaker Pelosi, who has led the caucus for 20 years, stepping down.
And Dave, briefly, are there any bright spots here for Democrats? I mean, it's been a lot of sort of the momentum and the wind is at the back of the Republicans. Anything you can say before I go back to the table about sort of what Sahil was talking about? Anything more you can say about what the polls are showing?
Well, it's fairly miraculous that Democrats are in the game in the Senate at all, given that President Biden is at a 42 or 43% approval rating nationally. It's a testament to how weak Republican candidates are and how many liabilities they have in Georgia and Arizona and New Hampshire. And yet in the House, Republicans are probably in the neighborhood of picking up between 15 and 30 House seats. More than 25 or 30 would be a huge wave for Republicans, considering they're starting out from a higher floor than they did in 1994 or 2010. They're already at 213 House seats. And yet Democrats' best hope is probably to minimize their losses to the teens. And they have a good chance of holding on to seats in places like Grand Rapids, Michigan, Toledo, Ohio, even Alaska, because Republicans nominated a few very flawed and unpopular candidates in those races.
It's very interesting. And Susan, I want to split my 2 minutes I have left here. One, I want to ask you about Nancy Pelosi. You wrote the book. There have been conspiracy theories about Paul Pelosi's attack, but also there are questions about her future. What can you say?
Well, in 2018, when she was running to a challenge to her leadership, she said she would only serve at maximum 2 more times as leader of House Democrats, which means this is the end of her remarkable tenure as leading House Democrats. I think that promise still holds, although she's been naturally reluctant to become an instant lame duck by talking about it. And I think that was the case even before her husband was attacked in this horrific way, in something that it's got to cause concerns and qualms for every American to see political violence on either side, as we saw there in San Francisco.
And Jeff, with the minute we have left, what's going on with former President Trump. There's reporting that he's eyeing November 14th, or at least sometime before December, to announce his presidency. What can you tell us? Clearly, you have the answer.
At this point, it would be more of a surprise for him not to run because he's been inching ever closer to it. I was with him in Sioux City, Iowa, at a rally on Thursday night, and he said he's very, very, very probably going to do it. Get ready, get ready. So, look, he's expecting to do it, trying to ride this Republican wave. That is why he is holding 4 rallies in 5 days leading up to Election Day. But he has something in common with President Biden. He's not wanted in every place on the campaign trail either. So he is in not really the hottest battlegrounds, but in terms of his own future, what he is trying to do is stop other Republicans from running against him or announcing. But I'm not so sure that's going to happen. So most interesting, look to Florida. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is eyeing a trip to Iowa, I'm told, as well. So keep an eye on all that next week.
It's very, very interesting. Thanks so much to our panelists for joining us and for sharing your reporting. And before we go, tune in Saturday to PBS News Weekend for a look at a swing California district that could determine which party controls and wins control of the House. Thank you for joining us. Good night from Washington.
Corporate funding for Washington Week is provided by...
For 25 years, Consumer Cellular has been offering no-contract wireless plans designed to help people do more of what they like. Our U.S.-based customer service team can help find a plan that fits you. To learn more, visit consumercellular.tv.
Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewens for the Ewen Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.